Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Hey everybody, welcome to Paranormal Karen. Paranormal Karen paraphernalia t-shirts all up on my website, karenrontowski.com. You can book a reading, you can take a tarot class, you can sign up for my Patreon.com/Rontowski, where I have extra episodes and tarot classes. But today, one of my favorite guests is coming back to visit us. And Richard, I have to tell you, I don't believe I have ever even given you a proper introduction, which is sort of my style. But I want you to tell me, how many books have you read? Written. You probably read a bazillion.
Read a lot, but yeah, written. Thank you, because I've got a new one coming out in a few weeks. I've published 13 so far, and the more affordable ones people might be interested in are Mummies, Cannibals, and Vampires. Perhaps the best-selling one, but also very beautiful production job. Fairies: A Dangerous History, with lots of lovely color images in it, and I really like the range of that book. And yeah, The Real Vampires, I hope to be putting out an affordable paperback very soon. But I'm putting out in the next few weeks Talking Dirty, The History of Disgust from Jesus Christ to Boris Johnson. And it's a wonderful kind of alternative history of almost everything, really. You know, disgust is one of the major emotions, and it hasn't had a popular history. And it's a fascinating way of looking at the stuff that we don't talk about, how it shapes us. But in quite a lot of ways, it's rather like the paranormal. You know, it's stuff that people don't talk about as much as they should, and yet it shapes us all the more powerfully because a lot of the time we're not aware of it, and it's closely bound up with politics, with racism, xenophobia. I'm sure probably transphobia, definitely homophobia. And yeah, people who are much more easily disgusted are much more likely to be racist, xenophobic, judgmental, right wing. Donald Trump gets his own chapter for being probably the most disgusted and the most disgusting president in U.S. history.
Or
so
person.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he's intensely germophobic long before the COVID situation. And uses a rhetoric of disgust against anyone that irritates him. But yeah, that book is a wonderful project to me because it gives you so much more. I'm keeping it down to a sensible length, about 100,000 words, but I'm doing that by having a separate book on disgust and ecology, which is a fascinating kind of seesaw effect. The more disgusted we get, the more it costs the environment. And then also one that's really fascinating to me. Why, in about the last 25, maybe 30 years, has disgusting entertainment become a very consumable, mainstream, middle class thing?
Oh, and I'm gonna pause for 1 second. Hang on. Okay, everybody, I paused that because we're on Zoom and there was a echo. I think we beat it, but if we didn't, hang on, we'll pause it again. That's that is so interesting what you're saying about disgusting entertainment, because I'm watching a Korean show called Alice in Borderland, and it's so clever, but the gross part is beyond gross.
Yeah.
Oops, now I lost you a second there. And yes, and also it's there's, as far as I can see, there's like no love scenes or sex scenes. It's just so clever and then so gross. Like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's huge. It's yeah, I mean, I won't take up a whole hour with it, but a fascinating subject. It goes back to Shakespeare and how disgusted people were by drama, just by the mere fact of drama and theatres existing. Now the kind of highest canon of British culture. But that's another volume which is going to have the swinging 60s and all sorts of court cases, banned books, controversial films, and the internet will be the kind of cutting edge at the very, very close of that book.
The dark net. Yeah, we got that echoes back. Well, okay, and it's gone. I guess that's just how it's going to have to be. But Richard, before we get to ghosts, how do you pick your topics? Because this is fascinating.
Yeah, thanks. That's an interesting question. I think usually with a good book, with a book that's worth doing, Either it just gets so big that it splits into two, three, or four, which is looking like Disgust. We'll have also a volume on disgusting politics. With Disgust, it actually came out of doing the dirty stuff for Mummies, Cannibals, and Vampires. So you kind of ask yourself, how could they break this radical taboo about cannibalism? They're detesting and deriding the supposed cannibals of the New World as the absolute scum of the earth, and they're practicing it for medicine on a systematic, industrial, and actually religious basis. The one thing about this was medicine was so dirty, disease was so dirty. You're looking at a condition like psoriasis, where you have a boil itching on your arm one day, you wonder what it is, somebody sticks a lancet in it, and swarm of tiny mites come out of your arm. And this was a condition that is survived until the 19th century in places. And you were actually just eaten alive by swarms of mites, which turned your flesh into more mites, and that was the end of you. So when you've got the disgusting stuff inside you, tapeworms, another one. You have a tapeworm of 30 meters inside somebody's guts, then people are not able to be so nice about the boundaries and the invasion. And it finally sort of summed itself up for me with the question, when everything was so disgusting, could you afford to be disgusted? And in fact, Shakespeare never used the word, huge, rich vocabulary, never used the word disgust. And it was really invented hygienically in the 18th century, and it was perfectly fused with a new class system. So it's got a very powerful lever arm of influence right down to the class-bound toxic mess that is Brexit Britain right now. I thought, what's going on here? Where was disgust? What did it do? When was it invented? And it came out of that chapter in Mummies, Cannibals, and Vampires.
Well, the older I get, the more squeamish I get. Like even in that show I'm watching, I can't.
Yeah.
I block out a lot. My eyes are closed a lot more. But
Yeah.
even thinking about human beings, I mean, I think one of the most horrible things that I ever heard was this was I think a East Coast colonial thing. Is I don't know if this was a prisoner or what, but they would strap someone to a board and cover them in honey, and then send them out on the water so that they'd be like eaten by bugs. And I'm like, or even tar and feathering. Why would you know what I mean? Like, how horrible were we as human beings that was a thing?
Yeah, it's that degree of otherness, that can be produced so quickly and was produced very quickly. People did equally atrocious things to each other in Europe because of the wars of religion. That happened very, very fast after the Protestant Reformation began, and Catholics and Protestants they slaughtered each other horribly, but they also ate each other at times, and that was a pretty fast kind of new identity split, within Christianity.
And saying you're doing God's work, or you're doing this for God, kind of thing.
Sorry.
Yes. Okay. So Richard, now you're here to talk about ghosts. This is a new book coming out. Did it come out yet?
No, I hope I'll be able to get an agent for this. It's a tricky one because some people simply don't know what you're talking about. This is why the book is called We Need to Talk About Ghosts. So I hope it'll come out this year. But I'm also actually working on a novel, because I think what's interesting about ghosts is people who would never believe in ghosts or poltergeists or an afterlife, they love ghost stories. They love ghost films. So I'm planning a series of novels about a psychic detective. And this will begin in the 1960s, one of my favorite recent decades, and run on through the 70s and 80s and run back into his past incarnation. Hopefully we'll get to talk about past life memories and reincarnation here. So I think I may end up doing my novel first. I like writing novels, and I've written quite a bit of fiction.
Well, the other thing with ghosts is it's very funny how I will tell you some of the people I've helped that had horrible things in their house, but not human
Yeah,
ghosts, like horrible things, would
sure.
always open with, I don't believe in this stuff. And they would end with, thank you for getting that out of my house. I don't believe it. It's almost like it makes them feel safe if they don't believe, even though they've
Strange.
just gone through like something. I don't know if I could live through that. And they
Yeah,
insist. And I had a friend that we were trying to start a little show, and it was going to be called A Psychic, a Skeptic, and a Dog Named Courage. And he was a
yeah,
journalist, and he would say, watch this. And we would interview someone, and he would say, watch the third time. And he'd say, do you believe in ghosts? And the person would go, no. And then he'd go, really? Not at all? Not even a little bit? No. And then he'd go, not even a little bit. You don't believe in ghosts? And then they would
yeah,
go, well, there was this one time. And then they would spill all these things. I know it's kind of funny because
yeah.
I don't know if I have the stomach to watch Ricky Gervais's thing, because I think he's a little harsh on people of my ilk. But I think it's funny because also those are usually the most psychic people, are the ones that are like, no, it doesn't happen, it's not real. And so
Yeah.
I always wonder, but it's such just the belief. And I wonder, back to the disgusting. I'm sure that changes with every culture, doesn't it? What's disgusting?
Oh, thoroughly. Yeah, that's what's fascinating. It gives you a kind of alternative history of a particular time. It's and of course, which place are you in as well as which time. So yeah, race, sexuality, class, religion. It's a wonderfully kind of varied kind of litmus test, for the unconscious or the kind of powerful loves and hatreds of a culture. Very much.
This is a terrible, I apologize everyone for this joke. It's not really a joke, but I was talking to my friend when Trump was elected, and she said, can you imagine that woman Melania has to sleep with him? And I said, I don't think that's happening. And she goes, yeah, but she has to smell him. And I was like, that's how disgusting he really is as a
Yeah,
human being,
yeah. Well, one of the things I learned on a long sort of roller coaster in disgustology or disgust studies, women are much more easily disgusted than men, and men do actually smell worse than women. Men have more apocrine glands; they vent out more of the chemicals that cause body odor. So women, God help them, often sort of at armpit level of a man, are are afflicted with this in so many more ways than men are. Yeah.
Wow. All right. Okay. So the ghosts are coming out. Have you been doing investigations or talking with people with ghosts? I mean, has it started for your novel?
Oh yeah, this is going to be the 10th year of my adventure in the labyrinth of ghosts,
Wow.
and it began in 2013. And if you'd got talking to me in the latter part of that year, I would have been very, very interested in poltergeist. So I was researching my book, The Real Vampires, and a lot of wacky stuff to a modern kind of enlightened eye there. But you can explain it all. You work it all out what's actually going on. Um, but the one thing you cannot work out is that across centuries and countries, they say the vampire throws you out of bed, beats you up, smashes up your kitchen, makes a hammering noise on your roof, throws showers of stones from nowhere through your windows. And with this, I kept following the story where it went or where I thought it might lead, as I tried to do with any research. And it led to the poltergeist. So I got hold of a couple of poltergeist books. I'm sitting in the nice sunny park. So I've been hundreds of times. And the ordinary world is kind of melting and disappearing as I plunge into this rabbit hole of madness. And I'm thinking, this is nuts. It made my head hurt like nothing I'd ever read, like nothing I'd ever studied. And I studied some pretty heavy philosophy, and yet it made a kind of weird sense of its own. It had its own laws. When you looked at enough cases, it wasn't just anything goes. There's a certain kind of pattern. There's actually what I've called ghost physics, which fascinates me more than anything, the kind of physical or biophysical laws that seem to be operating. And what really started turning me around here was going to the British Library, getting a load of poltergeist books, coming out at lunch, and meeting a friend I've known for 8 years. We have lunch and talk about all sorts of things. And after about an hour, because I've got this on my mind so badly, I say, have you ever come across poltergeist? This friend goes white, goes silent, clams up for about a minute, and then says, can we go somewhere more private? And we do. And we do. And this person that I've been through some pretty heavy weather with, by the way, we had a colleague who was in a lot of trouble, and we were often kind of pitching in to help her out. But anyway, this friend and I go to the little Quaker garden on the Euston Road, and tells me that she's had a poltergeist for 18 months, followed her from one house to another after a house move, witnessed by her husband and her daughter, who may have been an agent, probably was an agent, but my friend, I think, also was an agent for it in the sense of the poltergeist is using that person's energy and body, because she had it happening at work as well. You know, she saw it at work, so 3 different locations at least. And at this point, I start to think, right, you know, somebody looks you in the eye, you've known them this long, you can't just ignore them. I go back to Cardiff, where I was living, and I'm sitting outside a bar in the summer evening with a friend I've known for 12 years. Very, very no nonsense, hard headed, common sense kind of guy, being a head of department of a history department, which is kind of job you can't do if you're fairly wacky. And I raised the subject with him again. It's very much on my mind. And he said, oh, I've got one for you. So he grew up in a haunted house. He had a very mild poltergeist. But yeah, you know, he's been living with this since he was, I don't know, 20 years old.
Wow.
He's now just over 40. And in 12 years, he's never.
Oh, we lost you. There you go. Okay, we lost you for a second there. You said he's
Sorry,
been
yeah. In 12 years, he's never whispered this to me. And that really, hopefully we'll get into some more of the stories, but that is what's happened to me for 10 years. But it took me, I got another story just weeks ago from my next door neighbor, which was a good one. But it took me a long time to get away from poltergeist being something weird that is purely earthly, that is a strange kind of biophysics operating around a troubled person, very often a teenager, probably more often a girl. And I would not have, I had people telling me about ghosts. I mean, this friend here, 12 years I've known him, he's telling me about ghosts. And I'm listening to the poltergeist stuff, and I'm not listening to the ghost stuff. So it took me, I don't know, 2-3 years to really get my head around the ghost stuff. And it's been a gradual journey. So if people are listening to this and thinking, what is this guy talking about? That's what I would have thought 11 years ago, and I wouldn't have taken the ghosts on board 9 years ago. But it's been a wonderful journey, and it keeps offering you just amazing, rich discoveries every week, really.
Awesome. Well, and we're gonna take a break. We're gonna reconnect on Zoom, see if I can get that little echo out. But I love this conversation, and I already have like 3 questions for you, Richard. So, folks, hold on. We'll be right back.
Many people are unaware just how much hypnotherapy can help them, or think it's only to help lose weight or quit smoking. But there is so much more hypnotherapy can do. It can help with stress, anxiety, insomnia, phobias, performance enhancement, connecting with your spirit guides and higher self. You can even discover past lives and your life between lives. Heal traumas, break habits, find your deepest truth, or just have fun discovering who you really are, all from the comfort of your home. I'm Monique Pliakis. I'm a certified hypnotherapist, and I want to help you. Schedule a free consult by going to www.innerstandingshypnosis.com. That's INNERSTANDINGSHYPNOSIS.com. Innerstandings Hypnosis. Find your power and ignite your inner light.
Okay. Yes, I think we're back, and I think everything sounds good. Everyone, keep your fingers crossed that there's no ghosts in the machine. You know, I took a parapsychology course, and I should go back and take another. But there was, they did in this parapsychology course, everything was done by the book scientifically, and they really found out that like people that don't like computers have trouble with computers, and like I don't like printers, and I can literally get angry and break a printer from across the room. So I don't own printers anymore. I go to Staples and I have them print what I need. but they had a guy, and I think he worked for IBM or something. And this was long ago when the computers were really big. And his secretary had to put a piece of tape around the computer that he was not allowed to cross because the computer would break every time he got near it. And they did studies on this guy, and it was true. And I mean, everything's a frequency, but I every time my car starts, I say, I love you, because
it seems it's been studied, hasn't it? The Field, a book that I need to read again by Lynn McTaggart, talks about this ability to interfere with, what you would think is neutral kind of bulletproof technology. And the case that I've come across, fascinating one, where I talked about ghosts all the time in Durham, and I went every evening pretty much to a wonderful health club, which kind of pool, gym, jacuzzi, sauna, steam room, and I only used the wet side of it. I wasn't into the gym, but I knew people who were doing both, and I got friendly with just wonderful people from all around Durham in a few years. I had a conversation a couple of hours worth with one of them the other night, and they were interested, and they had their own stories. And one guy, again, very, very hard-headed guy called Ian. He was an HR manager for a bank. When he was young, contemplated becoming a soldier. So he was a very no-nonsense kind of guy. And I don't think he was as open-minded about ghosts as some of the people I talked to. But one day he said to me, well, listen to this. His daughter was about 19 or 20, and she had a slight speech defect. He'd been to the speech therapist for the very first time that day, so she was quite stressed about the whole thing, having anticipated it, gone through it. There did actually seem to be a ghost in the house. It was quite mild, but the ghost of her grandmother, apparently, that the mother and daughter heard. Anyway, she's telling Ian about the experience with the therapist, and she's standing in front of a glass kitchen cabinet on the wall about the level of her head. And while she's telling him, the cabinet shatters across. Nothing else breaks, nothing else moves. There's no tremor or anything in the room. And what fascinated me about that was it joined up with quite a few other cases, including an experience I had myself, actually. But also, it was a case where I think because I'd been talking to him about this, he spoke to me about it, but also he recognized it as something paranormal. He had a category and a kind of understanding for it, that it would have been just, wow, that was weird, but
it was too weird. It was there's our echo. It was too weird. It was beyond. Well, we always, and well, I shouldn't say this anymore, because we always say it's a young girl that's very psychic usually, and she's throwing that energy around. But I just helped out a guy that was in his 60s, that it was literally, he was very psychic, and all kinds of things were going on in his condo. And now he's as soon as he started sort of being aware, and then all the stories come out. Well, yeah, I was telling this person this and all these things, and now everything has calmed down in his house because it was coming from him. I want to jump to vampires for just a second. Did you ever make the connection between vampires and jinn?
Jinn, the Middle Eastern spirits? Not really, no. I did have a friend who was interested in jinn because he was from Iraq, and he had a strong interest in the paranormal. We met in Durham in quite interesting circumstances. But no, I know that it's so wide ranging. I looked at a little bit of the global folklore where you've got different versions of vampires, but it's so big that I tried to kind of channel it down to European and a bit of American in the end.
Okay, there's a wonderful podcast. I'm sending you down another rabbit hole, but it's called The Hidden Jinn. And
okay, great.
I think she's a lawyer by trade, but it's a great podcast. And there's a particular guest that she has on that has a Twitter account, and I'm going to look really quick because he is the expert. And I emailed him. He's too big right now for me. Oh, I guess I wouldn't, I might not be able to find him, but I'm just going to put in really quick, Jim.
I'll find it. Don't worry, I'll find it because that sounds a good one that I should put into the book actually.
Yes, and she will have a guy on there. I wish I could find it. You'll hear or you'll go through. I believe his first name is like Ali, Ali, or there's an A and an I in there. And they're really this has not been done better. I reached out to both of them but didn't hear. But her podcast is fascinating, and he's got something on Twitter almost every other day that's really fascinating about it because they do sort of have a similarity in there she I think she did an episode that was saying this is somewhat what people think where vampires came from because they're bloodsuckers or something like that. But it's very fascinating to see where these things, like how movies have moved them into like now they're the handsomest people we've ever seen, whereas like you were saying it's the opposite.
Yeah, I like the fact that Islam in general is much more receptive to ghosts and spirits. They seem to have no problem with it. And I think one of the strangest kind of black comedies and paradoxes that I've encountered in this research is I'll be trying to give a poltergeist account to a friend of mine because it comes up with our kind of shared research. And she'd be looking at me with a sort of look of quiet, polite pity, sort of hoping I'm going to stop soon. And I'm thinking later on, wow, this person is the most Christian colleague I have. They believe that they know the entire story of the creation of the universe and the forthcoming end of the universe and all sorts of improbable details in between. And that's okay because lots of other people believe it. And at the same time, they've got awful lot of it badly, badly wrong. If you go to a Catholic or a Protestant minister for help with a poltergeist, you could get almost no help and quite a lot of patronizing condescension. But also, if you're asking them about the afterlife, they've got it wrong. Christianity has got it badly wrong. And yeah, the best model really is Judaism, which, as I understand it, believes in reincarnation.
Mhm.
And it's very clear that yes, there are kinds of afterlife, there are alternative dimensions where you will go when you die, but you will be reincarnated. Who knows how many times? But the memories, of very young children about their past lives, verified ones, and the hypnosis that's been done with adults recovering past life memories. It's very clear that this is their job, this is their living, this is their profession. Catholic or Protestant ministers, and they've got it wrong. They've got it wrong. They need to pay attention. They need to listen to what people are actually saying, not what was cobbled together very doubtfully in about 200 AD in the Middle East.
Yes, and I feel like that's a whole that boy, you opened a Pandora's box with me there because it's also been switched so many times from the original Bible. And I also wonder, and Richard, you're a little more sensible than I lean conspiracy a little, but I really feel like they know more. For example, the Catholic Church knows more about exorcism than any other church because they've studied it for 35 years. But they would, whereas Mormons seem to be okay with mediums and spiritualists, they are kind of open to that. But because I read tarot cards, the Catholic Church would say there's something wrong with me, I shouldn't do it, whatever. Yet they have a patron saint of psychics and mediums, and it was done in the Bible. So I
Yeah.
feel like that, especially the Catholic Church more so than others, that idea of controlling with less information or don't be curious about this, not that they don't know, but that they don't want you to know. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, of course, they obviously do encounter, albeit unwillingly and unhelpfully, an awful lot of poltergeist cases, things that perhaps you roughly could call demonic possession. But in some of the cases, they make them much, much worse. A low key exorcism from a medium, and there's been plenty of those,
Mm-hmm.
is often likely to be more effective. I, uh, I said I had a recent poltergeist story, and my neighbour, a young teacher that I'd known for well over a year, but it's only when she says, "What are you working on now?" I tell her about the ghost book, And she immediately, you know, her eyes light up, and she says, "Oh yeah, we need this kind of book." Said, "I grew up in a haunted house. I was terrified all the time as a child. We moved because it was so bad, and we moved into another haunted house, and we had an exorcism. I don't know if it's Protestant or Catholic minister, but it made it worse." So yeah, I think really what is going on here is that there might be some degree of conspiracy, but I think really it's inertia and it's kind of corporate fronts that when you've traded on having an absolutely certain knowledge about this and this and this, and you're wrong, you're absolutely wrong about the afterlife, and also you don't practice what you preach either, in terms of the Catholics particularly. But when you've traded on that and you get good results from that kind of power of offering people certainty, you know, it's a similar kind of psychology of what Donald Trump will offer you. Then you're in trouble if you actually have to bend or move or break things to acknowledge what's really going on in people's haunted houses and in people's lives. So I think, you know, they know an awful lot more than they talk about because they've seen some crazy things. I mean, you're talking about one exorcism in the 20th century where the woman being exorcised, she suddenly bursts out of the bed, pulverizes to atoms, to dust, a prayer book that the priest is using, and glues herself to the wall about 9 feet above the floor. You know, this isn't in the Bible. It isn't in your theology, and yet, you know, you need to actually take in the evidence of your senses or what people are telling you. There was a wonderful case in Cambridge University in '97 where a couple of college servants, of course, you can't get anywhere more hierarchical than a Cambridge or Oxford college. I mean, a couple of the college servants had seen a ghost, and it was a kind of dark, smoky figure that hovered across the floor. They got laughed at by the very rational academics and the, you know, the senior people of the college, until the bursar of the college one night, this is a college called Peterhouse, I think it's the oldest college in Cambridge. He went into the common room, the senior common room, to get some fruit late at night, and there was a fire burning in the grate, but it suddenly was very cold, and he could see someone across the room. He thought simply that it was one of their fellows because it looked like one of their fellows, a chap called Max Barutz, about the same height and was balding. Then he realized that the figure was wearing what like 18th century dress, and he looked at it for a little while and it disappeared. And very tellingly, he said to the newspapers a little while later that for a while I didn't say anything about it because I'm supposed to be the financial administrator, not some nutcase who goes around seeing ghosts. But yeah, that was in the Times, and William Rees-Mogg, the former Times editor, said, "Yeah, loads of people I know have seen ghosts. I believe in them, yeah, because you can't ignore all these people."
I think we're on the other side where, besides that, and that is an echo, folks, the creepy. Sometimes people send me emails and they say, I heard a demonic voice behind you, but that's the echo that's just happening once in a while here. I feel like, so I've always believed, in fact, I'm always surprised when someone doesn't believe, but that's just talk about past lives and bringing that in with you. Your neighbor has a very interesting case of something following her and getting more aggravated. In fact, folks, by the time this comes out, I keep forgetting. I have a spiritual protection class I did with Tommy, my friend, demonologist Tommy, who is really the guy that gets rid of this stuff. But I wonder, did your neighbor, that had the poltergeist or whatever kept moving with her house to house, does she still have that now, or did it eventually get left somewhere?
This is a very good question because she's been away for Christmas and I've not been very well, but I need to talk to her about this and find out the details. You know, was it actually really bad luck and they moved from one haunted house into another haunted house? We'll hopefully get to talk about Keith Linder, who I know is someone who'd love to come on the show because he was a 40-odd year old man. I think he would have been 43 when he simply moved into the wrong house. So I don't know with Anna exactly whether it was something following, you know, her and her siblings, or they just actually moved into another haunted house. I really need to talk about the details of this. But yeah, you can just have bad luck and a whole lifetime without any paranormal experiences, and you move into a haunted house. This was 2012 in Seattle, and it is still following you right now as we speak. I mean, right now, after more than 10 years and several changes of address.
Yeah, that I am I think that's another one because a lot of my friends will say, "No, you have to psychically be tuned in, or you are something you carry ignites this." And I think sometimes it's just bad luck. You just get the wrong house.
You can get a very haunted house. Yeah, yeah.
Especially someone that's been conjuring. Usually, if someone conjures something, they anchor it to the house, which is best case scenario. But also, it's funny because I have a friend, Renee Watts, and she's an astrologer, and she says my astrology is the paranormal. In other words, I will probably never not be in a haunted place because it's me, not the place. Which is
Sure. Yeah, haunted people. This is a big category, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it usually is. It's not always, well, I feel like this is very interesting. I'm taking a class with a medical medium, and she is saying that the Egyptians were a very energetic people that became a very dense people. And we are a dense people that are becoming energetic because I do think, first of all, I think the activity is quite a lot more now than it ever was. And people of course are probably aggravating a little bit because they like the TV shows and stuff like that. But also, I think this next generation of kids, I guess they could be adults. I'm an old lady. They are very empathetic and sensitive and in tune and psychic. I really think they are. It's like we kind of make fun of them because they're not out trying to work 80 hours a week and crush each other. They don't want to do that. But I think they are a very psychic generation. Have you had any experience where you think it's a younger person or you see what I'm talking about there?
Yeah, I think I think the thing with, students around 16, 21, I think that I've just simply been in the good weather, going to the park, having my lunch, reading a book, and asking a few people randomly, "Do you believe in ghosts?" And these tend to be in a student town, a student city like Cardiff. They tend to be students, and they have given me, several stories in one afternoon, many times, and some unforgettable ones. But also, everybody needs to be asking this question: scientists, people who work with children, teachers, people in care, in care facilities with children. Why do children see ghosts when adults don't? So there I am in Durham. I've got into this subject for a few months, and I have a one-to-one dissertation meeting with a female student who is studying ghost stories. So I say, "Have you ever come across poltergeists?" And a little bit like your friend who'd asked the question 3 times, he says to me, "No, no. Oh, hang on though. Yeah, there is this one thing in our family." So it's as though this isn't something that I think about all the time, and yet this is her experience. They moved the family from the south to the north of England, and if you do that in England, you can afford a much bigger house in the north. Bought a very grand detached, or it might be semi-detached, Victorian house, listed building, I think, and I won't give the name of it for reasons that will become apparent, but they'd been in the house for a few weeks. They're renovating it because it had been quite neglected. And the girl who's telling me this had 3 sisters. She was one of the younger ones, and an older sister was about 7 at this time. This is the 90s, around about the 90s. And there's been mild poltergeist stuff. The dog will run to the door to greet somebody who's not there. It'll do it in quite a friendly way. There's the sound of a baby crying on the top floor. It had 3 floors, so what we'd call the second floor, which used to be a nursery, but there's no baby up there, obviously. The father, who's a submarine captain, the mother, I should stress, is a gynecologist. They're both very kind of heavy professional jobs. Father comes back from a submarine tour, and the wife says, "Look, see what I've done upstairs at the top floor. Have a look." So on the top floor, there's just one corridor and a room on either side. He goes in the first room, and all these little Russian dolls are nicely arranged on the mantelpiece, all look much cleaner and brighter and painted. He goes across the corridor to the next room, looks in there, comes back. As he comes back into the corridor, all the Russian dolls are arranged across the doorway of the first room. So one example of how poltergeist can do very neat, tricky things, and the neat, tricky things, the controlled stuff, is often more spooky than the wild, exploding, hurling objects. Anyway, they've been there tolerating this. Things will happen when she's painting. The paintbrush will completely disappear off the paint pot, and so forth. But it's tolerable. And one day she's there with the daughter, girl of about 7, just the two of them, and they're on the first floor. That's the second floor to American usage. And the girl says, "Mummy, who's that man on the balcony?" And there is indeed a little balcony inset there on the first floor to look out over the street. And there's no one there, dear. There's no one there, sweetie. No, there's a man. There's a man with a white beard and a skinny suit reading a newspaper on the balcony. So mother's listening to all this detail. There's nobody there. There's nobody there. And finally talks the girl out of it. And if ever there was a case that proves that you need to listen to your kid when they say anything spooky to you, this is it. A couple of weeks later, they're in the local art gallery, which is full of portraits of Victorian luminaries. And as they're walking about, the girl in question suddenly stabs her finger out and shouts to the parents, "That's him, that's him." And there in the portrait is a Victorian gentleman wearing a skinny suit, as in with skinny lapels, with a white beard. He was the man who was the architect behind that house. This is in the 1990s. No kids could get hold of the internet to come up with images like that.
Wow.
And being about 7 wouldn't have done anyway. So this was just one among several cases, and told to me by people looking in the eye about their own experience, where you think, okay, so what's happening here? I mean, a kid has got much more of the right brain about them, haven't they? Cultures can be much more right brain than left brain. The kind of pseudo rationalism of the left brain has dominated an awful lot of Europe and America, unfortunately, for about 200-300 years. But if you're kind of relatively blank, do you actually, in some ways, not just have that big dose of the right brain until you're about 11 or 12, but you actually behave a little bit.
Oops, we lost you a second there. You were right on.
Right, it's clearly when I move for a drink, I'll move my drink so I don't go left. When you're neutral in that sense, do you actually, in terms of the paranormal, behave like a machine? And I'll give you a case here from.
You know what? Let's take a break and come right back and just hold that thought exactly where it is, because also I want to talk about the Russian dolls. We'll be right back, folks.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and Prithvika is my collection of consciously created crystal and nature-forged jewelry. Prithvika translates to of the earth in Hindi, which represents the natural earth-made materials I'm working with, along with my personal ancestry and grounded energy. Each piece is created through ceremony and science, and completed with being Reiki charged. I'm currently featuring copper mirror necklaces, which can be used for protection and mirror magic. My intention is for your new piece of jewelry to feel like an extension of self, to help bring your desires to fruition and to amplify the magic within you. My Instagram is @Prithvika, and my website is prithvika.com. That's PRTHVEEKA.com.
All right, so pick that up right where you were before I cut you off there. You were talking about the right brain, left brain, and I have a theory on the kids and also the Russian doll. So go ahead.
So yeah, great to come back to the dolls, because I love this kind of controlled movement. But the thing about equipment, about voice recorders, about tape recorders, about cameras, and about something you wouldn't normally think about, happened to Keith Linder when he'd been in his haunted house for quite a while. He's a great gamer, and he got to beta test a new prototype Xbox system before it was on the market. So very excited about this. They fit essentially a frame of some kind on your television. This was about 2014, 2015, and they use this to monitor what the gamer is doing, all their movements, so it can be kind of interactive. But what this means also is that anything behind the gamer sitting in their chair, whether it's a bird, a cat, I suppose a wasp or a fly, anything moving will show up on the system. So that Keith's been playing for a while. They've got guys with clipboards and equipment in the house monitoring him. They've got guys doing the same remotely. And somebody says, hang on, we've got a problem here. Just stop. And they say there's something on the ceiling. And yeah, the system is picking up. No one in the room can see it, but the system is picking up softball-sized lumps, behaving a little bit like the material in a lava lamp. So slightly sort of restless things hanging on the ceiling. Microsoft never explained this. Nobody ever explained it, but Keith had little things, very, very black things kind of toddling past his door when he was upstairs in his study. And they were about that kind of size, I think, of a softball. So, yeah, just one example of how, radar, tape recorders, cameras constantly picks things up. And we're pretty sure that this equipment does not have ideas about ghosts. It does not have fantasies. It does not have concepts. And actually, of course, that's very true for children who a lot of the time don't think they're seeing a ghost, although they are.
Right. Well, also, I have seen other video of a black glob that walked around the corner, saw the camera on, and went back around. And it's the weirdest thing I had ever seen. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I've heard of them on the ground. I suppose they must be able to walk on the ceiling. But yes, and if we have a minute after the podcast, I'll talk to you about this situation. But that is it's very interesting that almost like there's two things with that, because the other thing with children, first of all, and again, I'm on the metaphysical world, so please feel free to pull in your science. But sort of between ages, I think 1 and 5, children are still, I want to say, they are in a dream state even when they're awake. There's some sort of a saying there. Maybe somebody as a psychologist out there knows this better than me, but they're sort of still a little bit in the dream world. In other words, they don't always wake up all the way, or they're sort of in between those two dimensions. And also, I think it's almost like on the phones, there's that special, have you ever heard of that special ringtone that only kids can hear and adults can't because our ears are no longer tuned to that?
Ah, right. Okay.
So they are a little bit sharper, probably a little, I don't want to say higher or lower frequency, but they're a little more in tune, just because of physicalities. But also, I think we haven't told them yet that doesn't exist. And then as you get older, then we incorporate shame or stuff like that. And it's said, I think, that in India, because they don't deny ghosts, people see them all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing which perhaps we'll talk about next time is that children, very young children, don't have disgust. I mean, if you have to sort of prod a parent, but if you prod them the right way, they will tell you family stories about the absolutely disgusting things their very young children did that they don't, talk about at dinner parties very much. But yeah, they don't have that sense of self until about the age of 3. We know for sure that kids who aren't actually taught it, aren't actually raised by adults in a particular way, they don't get a sense of self really at all, because the case of feral children bears this out very strongly. And yeah, cultures that talk about it, there are many cultures all around the world where, educated white Christians from Europe and America would look down politely on cultures in Southeast Asia, India, perhaps Africa, where actually they are the ones we should be listening to. They will support each other when they've got a spirit or poltergeist problem, and they will listen to people. I know cases where people can't tell their own family members about a ghost, and it's all happening in the same damn house, to the same family. So yeah, I think the idea that these wacky people believe all sorts of things. No, we have the same things happening to us in big numbers.
Yes.
And we have, in a culture that loves to be transparent, that loves to challenge taboos, we've created a very, very heavy taboo marked by shame and embarrassment.
And two things. There's the Russian doll thing is very interesting, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you some of our paranormal theories and plug my spiritual protection class at the same
Yeah,
time.
good.
But the soldiers that have come back from Afghanistan to America are kind of having a little bit of a jinn. Some of them have come back with something on them, which of course you're putting human beings into the worst type situation, a
Yeah.
war. And also they were, and if anybody knows anyone that would like to send me a story or be on the show, let me know. But I also don't want to disgrace anyone, because also that where the American troops were in Afghanistan before we left those poor people, the way we did,
Yeah.
they were right on where the Russians had fought. So literally underneath where they are were so many. They were told, if you see something like a human bone or something coming out of the ground, leave it. Don't dig it. Don't
Yeah.
worry about it. And
Yeah.
someone I knew had a story of he was on night watch and something was coming at him, and he told stop, don't, gave all the warnings, and then finally started shooting because this thing didn't stop coming, and it
Mm.
still didn't stop coming. And he had an antique gun, and he started shooting because he ran out of bullets. He started shooting the antique gun. Thing is still coming. Then he had his an antique knife. He was a collector of weapons, and but things keeps coming. Guy keeps coming, and by this time everyone's out. Now there's everybody around him, and they can't figure out why it took so long to take this person down. And someone pulls him aside and says, "We have to go see someone in the city." And he brings my friend to an old man, and the old man says, "Oh, well, that don't worry, that wasn't a person, that was a jinn, and he wanted to see all your weapons. He was curious about the antique weapons. He didn't care about the."
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
the person does not want to, I can't say who that is or anything like that. But since then, other people have told me about it's coming home from Afghanistan more so than anywhere else. So they must have been on that, wherever they were. It really was quite scary. And there's a lot more with that, but also with the dolls. So we sort of have a rule of thumb in the paranormal, or with the people that I've worked with, that once you're moving anything that's more than 1 to 2 pounds, it's not a human spirit, it's something else. So I don't know how heavy those dolls were, or even cracking the glass. The glass does sound like it was coming off the girl because she was quite frightened. But that's always kind of been the rule of thumb. If they're moving keys and light things, we usually don't worry too much. But when big stuff starts moving, yeah.
Well, you remind me there about Keith Linder again, because he had routinely thrown on his upper landing in the house an armoire, a wardrobe that he said weighed about 250 pounds. And this was thrown many, many times. And it seems the upper limit for, what a poltergeist, just using that term as a broad label, can do. And one day Keith came home. He was often coming home and finding kind of a sort of bustling rush of something running away from the door as he came in. And clearly something was in there a lot of the time when he was away. He had some fascinating kind of IT stuff set up, which proved what they were doing and how they were doing it. They were moving his chairs from the bottom floor to the upper floor, for example. How they did this was interesting. But anyway, he went up to the landing, I think, quite quickly one day, and he disturbed something. And he said he felt something rush past him. And he said, and he's not given to exaggeration. I mean, what he survived here, he went through pretty stoically, really. But he said here that he suddenly knew that this thing was unbelievably powerful and it could do whatever it wanted. And this was, a feeling of something rushing right by him. And when I say that, this was somebody who would lie on his bed trying to catch up on his broken sleep sometimes in the day. And these little lumps that we're talking about. I mean, Keith would love to talk to you about this thing scuttling away from the camera because he saw these things with his own eyes going past his doorway over and over again, but he also felt them. They would land about the sort of weight of a bag of sugar, perhaps, on his bed. He would feel the bump, the indentation in the mattress, behave a little bit like a cat approaching you on a bed. And one day he's half asleep, he's trying to get to sleep, and irritably, he just says in his head, doesn't speak it aloud, is that get it over with, get it over with. And this thing kind of stalking towards him, suddenly it rushes through him. And he said it was the most euphoric experience he'd ever had. There was a kind of electrical tingling out to the tips of his fingers and toes. And I read this editing his book. Thoroughly recommend his first book, the Bothell Hell House. I edited this before it was published. And as I'm looking at this, sitting at the computer, I think, good God, I've seen this before. There was an American guy in Washington who ran a restaurant that was quite haunted. And one day, after several kind of sights and phenomena with the ghost, it went through him. And he said it was the most euphoric experience of his life. It's like a very, very weird shot of energy, some kind of quasi-electric shock, but very, very ecstatic, actually.
I've had a couple of people, or known a couple of people on investigations where something ran through them. And yeah, it is very, very interesting. And what is the name of Keith's book again?
Yeah, I mean, Keith would love to come and talk to you. I think it's called the Bothell. Bothell is a suburb of Seattle where he lived, the Bothell Hell House. And as I say, he doesn't exaggerate. It was a hellish experience and a very new house, probably built on an old site, but a suspicious number of tenants in a very few years. And some very heavy stuff happened to one of his past tenants.
Is he?
As one of his.
Oh, is he out of that house now and problem solved?
He's out of it, but I'll just give you a very, very quick kind of summary of what's happened to him. He's had this, whatever it is, and you might well be right that it's not human, although they have picked up human voices speaking in English on the EVPs. But anyway, he's had this follow him around to his mother's place in Texas, to hotels across America where he's gone for business. He's had it whack him in his workplace, spin him round on his office chair, which in terms of force is interesting because Keith is 6'5". He's a big guy. And he's had it follow him to his next apartment, I think now a second apartment at least. And there's a degree with this thing of persecution, which is almost as extreme as anything in the history of poltergeists. And it would write in the snow on a winter's day, die KL, Keith Linder. It would scratch out him on a photograph when there's several people in the image. It was clearly listening, watching. It was trying to split up Keith and his girlfriend and arguably succeeded by playing all sorts of tricks. And
oops, we lose you? Very interesting place to lose Richard. Okay, hold on. All right, so folks, the Zoom meeting just ran out, but please make whatever you want of that because, as you said, Richard, it was a very suspenseful point in the story, which, okay, go ahead. You were saying it was scratching.
Yeah, I'm just giving a very broad summary of Keith's experience, but it brings us to a phenomenon in a moment, which I think is fascinating. So he's really been picked on by whatever was in the Bothell house. It's I should add it's bashed him and bumped him on airplanes at 35,000 feet. So try hoaxing that or explaining it away rationally in inverted commas. And then the latest thing has been since he's split with his girlfriend, he's been going on dates with various women, and he'll be sat at a jazz club with a new woman having drinks. And this particular case, he's in the corner. He's not being jostled about by lots of people going past. Anyway, he's having the poltergeist bump their drinks off the table and spooking the hell out of his date, who will say, Keith, I really, really enjoyed this. I really like you, but I can't do this anymore.
Right.
The very most recent thing has been, there's probably more stuff which I need to catch up on, but the one I know about, a few weeks ago, last year, he was supposed to go to drinks with friends, and it's quite a lot of old close friends, but he'd hurt, I think it was his shoulder. Anyway, so he reluctantly decided he couldn't go. While he sat at home thinking, oh, they're all out there enjoying their drinks, I think it was probably a summer evening, he gets a message from one of these friends saying, Keith, did you come after all? Are you here?
Oh.
And the guy has seen Keith on I think it was a rooftop bar. But anyway, he's seen him there. He's not expecting to see him. Keith's reluctantly cancelled him showing up, and yeah, he's not an easy person to mistake. 6'5", and this is an old friend. So yeah, he described Keith, the shirt he was wearing. It wasn't the shirt that Keith was wearing that evening when he got the message, but I know it was one that he actually owned. The point being, anyway, that when I talk about the labyrinth of ghosts, and it's a chapter title I use in this book, we need to talk about ghosts. You might think you've seen a ghost, and yeah, you sort of have, but you have not seen a dead person. There are quite a lot of ghosts of the living.
Yes.
And
yes.
If you want a matter of public record, in the House of Commons in Parliament in London in 1905, there was a very, very big vote between the Liberals and the Conservatives, and a Conservative MP called Karen Rash was at home in bed with pretty bad flu or some kind of bug. I mean, there's no way he could move, and he felt very bad because everybody needed to be there. You have to be in the lobby to vote. You can't do it by proxy. You couldn't in those days. Nowadays, when Tory MPs spend their time holidaying or doing second jobs all around the world, you can do what you like. But yeah, in those days, you had to be in the House to vote. And suddenly he was in the House. Two of his colleagues and close friends saw Karen Rash sitting in what I think was his usual seat, which is quite sort of customary to be where you always are in the House. And they were struck by the fact that he didn't look himself, and he didn't answer them when they greeted him. Anyway, he's seen by two different people who know him well. Presently, he's not there anymore. What was going on here clearly was that spontaneously the need to be there actually turned into him being there. So he's lying in bed, bedridden, with illness, and he's in the House of Commons. And this has happened to a surprising degree for various reasons, so that somebody thinks they've seen the ghost of a dead person and they've seen the ghost of a living person.
Yes. That's a very interesting. You save all those stories for our next podcast, because that's a very interesting. My friend Elaine had a thing like that too.
I'd love to.
Yeah.
Thanks, I'd love to.
Or someone that has left a residual energy because it was so intense, but they're not dead, but their residual has left. I'll just give you a hint on Keith, and then we'll talk outside the show. But there seems to be demonic levels. Much like in the military, there's privates, generals, and whatever is with him is very high level. And those little things are almost, they come into the little blobs, almost come in to cause chaos or to open up fear, or they're almost like the front men that come in first. So that's what's sort of happening there. But I'll talk to you more about this off. But Richard, I cannot wait for your next book to come out, or just call with these ghost stories. The beginning of the year, I was like, yeah, my podcast is getting a little healing, but not scary again. And you have not disappointed us at all today.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I'd love it if somebody could help Keith. And I think
do have who can help him.
I would love that. It's been far too long, and I don't know how he survived it. I really don't. But yeah, he is unusual in that he will talk about this very, very openly and very actively. So he's a great witness to an epic case.
Fantastic. Okay, so Richard, I'm sure you're going to be back this year whenever, whatever book, whatever you want to talk about. You know, you're always welcome on my podcast.
I'd love to. I can horrify and disgust as yeah.
And so there's a couple of places where people can find you, but also, folks, go to Amazon and find Richard Sugg, Sugg, and because I get alert if something changes with your books, and that's what they should do so they know when the next one comes. Is that a good way to do it, or you tell them where to find you?
That's great. It is all Amazon at the moment. You'll find fairies in various bookshops. And if anyone wants to get fairies into their local bookshop, let me know. I'd like to support small bookshops. But also, if you just want to sample what I'm doing, and a lot of the interests I have are quite passionate ones, but they don't make themselves to a book. So I'm putting out an awful lot of research this year on my new podcast, my own podcast. It's just me at the moment. I will have guests presently, but yeah, if you go to Dark Histories at the Secret University, it's on my Amazon page, and you can find everything there really, from an introduction to ghosts, introduction to mummies, cannibals, and vampires, through to an introduction to Disgust, and just things I love. John Muir, poetry, will be up there. Ghost Stories for Christmas was done a few weeks ago. So yeah, I'd love to get people involved with that, and hopefully have some guests on Dark Histories in this coming year.
Yes, I was listening to it. I can't believe I forgot to mention that, but I was listening to that on my last long drive.
I forgot, so that's okay.
Fantastic. All right, Richard.
Thanks so much.
You got it. Hang on until after I close this out, Richard. Thanks, everybody. Check out the. Hopefully, I have an ad on this for my my class and all my things I forget to promote. Be sure you check out Richard. Also, if you have a podcast, reach out to him. As you can tell, he's a fantastic guest. Thanks to Mike at Uno Rising Media. We'll see you all next week.